Hello, everyone. Welcome to this presentation on rubber manufacturing and composition of rubber compounds. My name is Tine Hardeman. I work at Datwyler in the Materials and Surfaces department, which means that I work with our rubber formulations on a daily basis. I work on some compound development. And I've also developed a special interest for the field of extractables and leachables, which is why, of course, I'm also presenting here today. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizing committee for giving me the opportunity to speak here today. And of course, I hope this presentation can help on giving you some more background on rubber products, which are, of course, often a component of the primary packaging of small volume parenterals. For those of you who do not yet know Datwyler, we are a company with a global presence with headquarters in Switzerland. And we focus on innovative and system-critical elastomer components. And via this innovation, we try to make our products safer, smarter, as well as more sustainable. As you could see also already a bit from the previous slide, we do not only have products for healthcare solutions, but we also have an industrial solutions branch, which focuses on different markets such as mobility, general industries, and food and beverage. But of course, today we will focus on the healthcare solutions and then also more specifically the pharma segment. Because for this healthcare solution, we in fact offer a large number of products, as you can see, over 18 billion components per year. And these have a variety of different identities. So we have different products. For example, for the medical segment, we have our injection sites, blood collection stoppers, also needle sleeves, and plungers for single-use systems. Whereas for the pharma segment, we have all the components for prefilled syringes and cartridges, such as the necessary plungers, combined also with tip caps, needle shields, as well as rigid needle shields. Of course, for vials, we have all the necessary stoppers, such as serum, infusion, and lyo stoppers. And then finally, we also have a number of products in our portfolio, which have different materials, such as aluminium. So we have our aluminum caps and flip caps. And then finally, we have a combination product where we have the combi seal, which of course consists of an aluminum part combined with a rubber liner. Okay, but going to the topic of today, I would first like to discuss rubber manufacturing. So I would like to give you an overview of the different process steps, for which I actually have an animated video to show you. Then next, I will discuss the rubber composition to give you a bit background on the type of ingredients that we add into the rubber. Next, I can show you how we can play around a bit with these ingredients and tune the formulation to get an optimal performance for our different rubber compounds. And then finally, I can give a bit more background on the type of testing that we do during compound development to ensure that the rubber has all the right properties. I will now give a bit more information on the rubber composition, so on the different ingredients that you saw going into the mixer. And then we really need to go to the basics of the rubber, so have a look at how rubber works, in fact. And what we have is the elastomer as the main ingredient. So this elastomer is really the backbone of the rubber. It's a polymer, so it means that this consists of extremely long molecules, which is already necessary to have these entanglements and these very interesting polymer properties, these mechanical properties. But also essential for an elastomer is that it has reactive sites. And these reactive sites are really essential for rubber because these give the possibility to cross-link. And cross-linking is really what makes a rubber have elastic properties, or what makes a rubber, in fact. Now, these reactive sites typically will not do anything by themselves. So to make this cross-linking happen, you need to add a second ingredient, which is the cross-linking system. And this cross-linking system has the goal to connect these different reactive sites that are on the elastomer via a chemical reaction. And this chemical reaction is called cross-linking, but can also be called vulcanization or curing. And as you can see here in the illustration, before the cross-linking or curing reaction, we simply have a mixture of the elastomer and the cross-linking system, whereas after this curing reaction, the cross-linking system has made links between the reactive sites on the elastomer. So now the elastomer chains are linked together and the material becomes elastic. So this is really a big change in properties as well. So before curing, you have a plastic permanently deformable material, which means that if you would have a brick of this uncured rubber and you pull it apart, it would just stay in this elongated shape. Whereas after the curing, you have an elastic material, which means that if you would pull this material, it would try to go back to its original shape, pretty much like when you pull a rubber band. So you really have this elastic material. Specifically at Datwyler, as you could also see during the video, this curing reaction happens during the molding. So under the influence of the high temperature, the cross-linking reaction happens. And so this is when we go from the brick of unvulcanized material towards the sheet of rubber products that you see here. Now, apart from these two ingredients, these are really the two essential ingredients to have a rubber, but there are also many other ingredients that are added. And one of the most important ones in terms of weight is the filler. So next to the elastomer, the filler is in fact the second major ingredient. So again, meaning in terms of weight, the cure system is essential for the properties, but is only added in very small amounts, whereas the filler can be added in much more substantial amounts, in fact. Fillers are mineral powders, and talc or clay are very popular for the healthcare segment. And the filler is actually simply used to introduce hardness and rigidity. And then there are other small ingredients that can be added. Many different types can be considered. Colorants are very popular and are typically added. Pigments and dyes are the two most important categories, but pigments are really very much preferred in the pharma segment because these are inorganic materials. So this means that they are not soluble and will not give rise to organic extractables, such as, for example, titanium dioxide. On the other hand, you have dyes, but as these are organic compounds, they can be soluble and they can give rise to extractables, which is something that we typically want to avoid. Then another type of materials are plasticizers or waxes. They can be used to tune the properties of the compound or enhance the processability. Then there are, for example, also antioxidants and antioxidants to improve the resistance to aging. And how much of these you need to add is also very much dependent on the type of elastomer that you are using, as I will also discuss again a bit later. And also, of course, other ingredients are possible. But in fact, for chemical cleanliness, the fewer ingredients, the better. Of course, you need to add enough ingredients to really get a rubber with nice properties that gives you all the properties that you need, in fact. But if you can do this with less ingredients rather than more, this will obviously be preferred because what you don't put in the rubber cannot come out of the rubber. So every ingredient that you add is another component that can give rise to new extractables. So we really try to work with as little ingredients as possible, but of course, taking into account that you need to have good rubber properties. Just to give you a bit more a concrete idea of what this means, I gave some typical examples. First, for the elastomer, and this is, of course, really a very important choice because this elastomer is the backbone of your rubber. I gave some more details here. So for the pharma segment, halobutyl is really very much preferred. You can also find some polyisoprene and SBR, and those are actually more or less it. There is some nitrile rubber for very specific applications, but these are by far the most popular ones. This is a bit different from the general rubber industry, where, for example, EPDM, etc., is very popular. But within the pharma segment, halobutyl rubber is the first component of choice, and this actually has a number of good reasons. So there are three important advantages that this halobutyl rubber has that makes it so popular. First of all, there's a very low gas permeability, which means that oxygen cannot come into the system, and also water vapor cannot go out. Second, it's also possible to cure halobutyl rubber with a clean cross-linking system. So you don't need to add too much harsh or dirty chemicals, in fact, to make the vulcanization reaction happen, which is a great advantage if you want to have a clean rubber. And also it's quite resistant to aging in itself, which means that you don't need to add too much antioxidant to have a good rubber with a long shelf life. So as you can see, these properties make that it is possible to get a clean compound with a low gas permeability using halobutyl rubber, which is why it's so popular and why it's also ideal for long-term contact with drugs. If you compare this, for example, with polyisoprene, you will see that this one has a very higher gas permeability, and it also has a more complex cross-linking system, meaning that it's more difficult to get a clean chemistry there. So you need to add some accelerators, etc., to get this cross-linking going, or you need to shift to other types of cross-linking systems. And also this one is more prone to aging, which means that you will need to add more antioxidants, for example. But on the other hand, polyisoprene has some very good elastic properties, which is why it's used nevertheless for some applications that really need this. And then a third example was SBR. This one has an intermediate gas permeability, so intermediate between halobutyl and polyisoprene. But also this one has a more complex cross-linking system and is also more prone to aging compared to halobutyl rubber. Okay, quickly having a look at the other ingredients. So for cure system, of course, this depends on the type of cure system that you're using. Sulfur-based cure systems are the classic typical ones. This can either be with sulfur itself or sulfur donor systems, but there are also other options such as peroxides, resins, and some other novel cure systems. Then for the filler, as I mentioned already, clay and talc are very popular for healthcare. For other industries, such as, for example, for tires, carbon black is a popular filler material, but this is really avoided in the healthcare segment. And you, for example, also have some calcium carbonate in older grades, but also in modern formulations, you will not find it that much anymore. Next, we have the pigments. As mentioned, pigments are really preferred over dyes. And then the three most popular pigments are titanium dioxide for white, obviously, carbon black for black, and iron oxides for this rusty red color. And of course, it's possible also there to make combinations. And of course, combining white and black can give you all different shades of gray. And then finally, there's also the antioxidant, which I think many of you know. PhD is, of course, a very, very well-known example, as well as Ilganox 1010, but there are also different types of grades possible there. Okay, so now that we have a bit more background on what is in rubber, we can see how we can use these ingredients to tune a formulation for optimal performance. And I gave some examples here, of which I will discuss a few. The first one being, for example, if you want to tune the permeability, as I just mentioned in the explanation of the elastomers, you can use a blend, for example, of halobutyl and SBR. This halobutyl is very impermeable, so we'll have very low gas permeability, whereas this is higher for SBR. So if you want a compound that has a higher gas permeability, you can, for example, include some SBR into a halobutyl compound. This can, for example, be necessary when you want to have a formulation for tip caps or needle shields. If you want to enable ETO sterilization of the tip caps or needle shield on the barrel, you need to have a sufficiently high permeability to be able to really sterilize the entire area also around the needle here, for example. And you can achieve this by including SBR into the compound to have a sufficiently high permeability, for example. Another thing that I wanted to mention is the Omniflex coating. So we have this Omniflex coating, which acts as a barrier towards extractables, because as I think many of you know, a coating will act as a barrier. So if you really need a very high purity, then you can add this coating to even further reduce extractables. So this is, for example, here below, you can see the chromatogram of a uncoated rubber, but already a modern formulation, because if you would look at older formulations, you would see really very crowded chromatograms, and the rubber industry has already evolved, in fact, greatly, and really reduced this amount of extractables. However, of course, you cannot go to zero extractables, so there will always be some, and in case you really need to reduce them further, a coating can help to either eliminate or reduce the amount of extractables that you are seeing. So for very sensitive drugs, of course, a coated rubber is also an option. And then a final example I wanted to share with you is if you, for example, need a stopper for lyo applications, you want to avoid moisture uptake. And this can be done also by a right choice of ingredients. So by choosing more hydrophobic ingredients, you can limit moisture uptake, which is what we have done, for example, for one compound. And you can see here at time 0, we have the starting weight. And you can see that our low moisture compound takes up less moisture compared to typical rubbers that are on the market. And that also after drying, it's still capable of releasing moisture quite efficiently. So if you take this stopper, you will have less moisture in your system after the lyophilization process, which is, of course, very, very interesting. Okay, as the last part of the presentation, I just wanted to touch upon the type of testing that we do for rubber. There's, of course, the basic characterization that also always needs to be done. And this data is available on the compound data sheet. So when you design a rubber, of course, physical properties need to be determined. The most popular ones are hardness, compression, set, density, ash, tensile strength, etc. Just to have a rough indication of what type of rubber material that you have. Also, the FTIR spectrum is always recorded, also because many customers use this for incoming inspection, for example. So this is just a basic characterization. Also for chemical properties, because we are working in the pharma segment, obviously compliance to pharmacopoeia is very relevant. So we always standard test the European, US, and Japanese pharmacopoeia for our rubber compounds, as well as some elemental impurities. And then the third part of the standard package, let's say, is the biocompatibility, so testing according to this USP 87. So this is the standard test work that always needs to be done. But of course, you can and you should, in fact, go further than that. And of course, also test the functional properties, which obviously depends on the product type you are looking at. For stoppers, you can test seal integrity, fragmentation, resealing, piercing force, and insertion force. And for plungers, obviously seal integrity needs to be there as well. That is always required. But for plungers, you will want to focus more on break loose forces and gliding forces. There are some standards that you can follow, but of course, it's often necessary to adjust the testing based on the intended use. For example, if you're developing a compound for multi-piercing applications, then you will want to test with more punctures than the typical 4 that is, for example, in the European pharmacopoeia. You might also want to consider testing with different needle types. For plungers, you might want to consider gliding behavior in different types of barrels, etc. So you really need to adjust the testing based on the type of application that you're envisioning. Also, with regards to sterilization, some additional test work may be needed. For example, if we offer a compound in a ready-to-use concept, so after gamma irradiation, it's obviously necessary that we determine the maximum dose that can be used, by which we can still ascertain that the rubber has all the right properties that it still needs to have. So this is also a test that we often do for different compounds. And then, for example, more for tip caps or needle shields, the effect of ETO sterilization can also be considered. And then finally, we have the further chemical analysis. And again, this depends on the type of compound that you want to have. For example, if you want to have a WFI compound, you want to test compliance with the water for injection and purified water section of the European Pharmacopoeia. You might also want to have a look for cation extraction and citrate buffer. And of course, there is extractables testing, which is, it has always been relevant, but has still increasing importance. So which is why we have extractables reports available for most common formulations. So what we want to do there is really make it as broad as possible so that the customers have the most use of it. So we have different solvents, all the relevant extract or analytical techniques to really make it as general as possible so that our customers can pick the type of information that is most relevant for them. And these extractables reports that we have, in fact, available for our most common formulations, and that were made in collaboration with Nelson Labs. Okay. And with this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for attending. And of course, if you have any questions, I will be happy to answer them.